I have decided.
What will it be?
You're my mother's friend. We shouldn't be doing this. That was exactly what I said to the most dangerous man I've ever known. Tommaso Marchand was 50 years old, ran an empire that made politicians tremble, and was the last person I should ever fall for. But when my ex-fiancé started stalking me and turning my life into a nightmare, it was Tommaso who showed up to protect me. I tried to keep my distance. I tried to remember that it was wrong. But some men don't crash into your life with promises. They walk in quietly and make you question everything you believed about love, danger, and fate. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1, We Shouldn't. The heel of my silver sandal decided to betray me right in the middle of the gallery hall, and I thanked the universe that no one was watching but Margot. She looked up from the counter, held back a laugh, and went back to pretending she was checking an invoice I knew had already been checked 3 times that afternoon. Aubrey Vance, 27 years old, about to break her ankle before the charity event of the year, she announced in a news anchor tone, without raising her voice. Authorities are urging calm. Margot Hale was the official receptionist of the River North Gallery, my best friend by choice and my therapist by her own insistence. 29 years old, loud laugh, an opinion about everything, calculated patience with rich clients. I wouldn't survive that winter without her. The lady in room 3 wants to know if the canvas matches the gold tone of her mirror, Margot said, bringing me back to earth. I told her yes. You confirm it and we close in 10 minutes. I didn't even see the mirror. Neither did I. The lady didn't see the canvas. We're all lying elegantly. It's art. I laughed for the first time that day. The lady paid by card, kissed both my cheeks, and left with the canvas wrapped up like a war trophy. Margot closed the gallery door, leaned against it, and looked at me, the way she only did right before saying some uncomfortable truth. You don't have to go tonight. I do. Your mother won't notice if you show up 30 minutes late. She'll notice if you don't go at all, but that's her problem. I grabbed my coat from the hook, fixed my hair in the reflection of the storefront window. Marin Vance, my mother, smiled out from a promotional photo stuck to the night's invitation, a smile trained over decades of ballrooms, an influential widow, a socialite who moved among politicians and men who didn't fit on any newspaper's lists. The cover diva, Margot murmured, coming closer with the invitation pinched between 2 fingers. Your mother has aged like an investment fund. The more time passes, the more dangerous. What kind of compliment is that? The kind you need to hear before you walk into that ballroom. The cab dropped me off at the entrance of the old hotel near the lake, one of those places that seem built to house secrets. Crystal chandeliers, burgundy carpet worn thin at the edges, waiters in bow ties circling like chess pieces. The wind off Lake Michigan cut between the cars, cold and salty, and I held my breath climbing the steps because, for one absurd moment, I considered asking the driver to circle the block again. I went in. The air inside was too warm, perfumed with some expensive lily my mother had surely chosen. Marin was across the ballroom, holding a champagne flute by the stem as if she were holding reins. She saw me and gave a minimal lift of her chin, her greeting when there was an audience. I answered with a measured smile, took my own glass from a passing tray, and promised myself 40 minutes. 40 minutes and I'd leave. Filippo Rourke appeared before I'd taken my 3rd sip. He was leaning against a column like someone staging having arrived by chance. Trained smile, dark hair slicked back, black suit without a single wrinkle. Filippo had been my fiancé on paper until the night I broke it all off. One night before it became irreversible. My mother still called it a good friendship between old friends, as if she didn't know the real name of the South Side he came from. Since then, he'd greeted me in public as if nothing had happened, and looked at me in private as if everything was still going to happen. Aubrey, Filippo, you look beautiful. You need glasses. He laughed with his mouth closed. He took my glass without asking, set it down on a side table with calculated care, held my elbow with the treacherous gentleness of someone who knows that gentleness hurts more when it doesn't ache. Come on. There's a hallway just over here where we can talk without everyone pretending not to listen. I don't want to talk. 2 minutes. The pressure of his fingers on my elbow wasn't a 2-minute pressure. I went, because a scene in front of my mother was still one of the few things she would never forgive, and because some cowardly part of me still obeyed on autopilot. The private hallway was behind a door upholstered in moss green velvet. Low chandelier, dark wood walls, still air, The jazz from the ballroom muffled as if it came from another floor. Filippo let go of my elbow only to press his palm against the wall beside my shoulder. You're putting on a ridiculous performance, Aubrey. What performance? The free-spirited girl one. Your mother owes money to half the city. You work at a gallery pretending it's a profession. And here I am offering you protection again before things get ugly. Come back to me before the war starts up again. There's no war. There is. You just haven't been told. His hand slid down the wall and stopped near my face. I smelled the whiskey on his breath, sweet and old, and the idiotic memory of my body remembered one specific night I had decided to forget. The thin scar on my left wrist started to burn as if it had a life of its own. Take your hand off. Aubrey, take your hand off to Filippo. The velvet door opened without a sound. Take your hand off her. The voice was low, with that kind of calm that makes the air change temperature. Filippo turned slowly, like someone who wants it to look like he decided to turn on his own. I recognized the man in the doorway before I'd even processed him. I'd seen him in photos in my mother's living room, always in the corner, always looking at the camera half a second after everyone else, as if he'd counted them all. Tommaso Marchand. I knew the name because my mother said it low, in whispers that ended before I reached the room. An old friend of hers, the kind who appears on every Christmas gift list and in no photo caption. Dark gray suit, black bow tie, a matte silver signet ring on his left hand. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Tommaso, Filippo said, and his smile trembled once. We're talking. It's over. Miss Vance and I have unfinished business. Miss Vance is going to get some air on the terrace. You're going back to the ballroom. If we cross paths again tonight, it'll be somewhere with witnesses. I didn't see his hands move. I saw Filippo's hand letting go of the wall beside my face. I saw the step back. I saw the lifted chin in a late attempt to keep some dignity. Filippo passed Tommaso without touching him, but gave the shoulder swerve of someone who recognizes the hierarchy even when he won't admit it. Tommaso waited for the velvet door to close. Then he looked at me. It was the first time he'd looked at me all day, and it lasted a second longer than it needed to. Can you walk? I've always been able to walk. Correct answer. We'll go to the terrace anyway. We went up a narrow interior staircase, steps of waxed wood that creaked softly, leading to a service door. He opened it, held it, waited for me to pass. The terrace was small, of pale stone, with a low parapet, and the city sprawled below in little yellow dots. The wind off the lake hit my face, and I realized I was cold only then, my body remembering to function after having shut down for a few minutes. Tommaso took off his jacket without comment and offered it. I hesitated. I accepted. The jacket weighed more than any jacket had a right to weigh, still warm from his shoulders, and it smelled of something between cedar, snuffed tobacco, and an old cologne I couldn't describe without sounding ridiculous. You don't owe me a thank you, he said, leaning against the parapet beside me, but at an exact distance. Your mother has been my friend longer than you've been alive. How romantic of you to say. It wasn't meant to be. Mission accomplished. He laughed. It was a low sound, almost hidden in his chest, and I filed it away as a dangerous archive. I looked at the lake to have somewhere to look. Do you always intervene in the hallways with your family's friends? When the hallway is that size and the man is that type, yes. And when he isn't, then I let the person handle it alone. You would have handled it alone. How do you know that? By the order in which you said, take your hand off, 3 times. The 3rd time, your voice had changed. I just went in early to save him the time. I looked at him. He kept looking at the lake, his profile firm against the low light of the parapet. That's how I realized he had been standing on the other side of the velvet door longer than I'd noticed. How long were you there? Long enough. Why? Because your mother asked me to keep an eye on you today. I said I would. I didn't say I'd be invisible. I closed my eyes. I felt the shame rise up the back of my neck like a fever. There it was. Me, 27 years old, pretending I'd left my mother's collection, and the collection had sent me a guard in a gray suit, with a black bow tie, and a calm that made everything worse. You're my mother's friend, I said, before thinking. We shouldn't be doing this. The sentence came out on its own, with the weight of a prayer said too late, and I didn't even understand exactly what this was before the words landed between the two of us like an object no one dared to pick up. Tommaso turned his face. It was a second longer than it should have been. Again, his eyes were dark and in no hurry at all. Miss Vance. Aubrey. He waited for the name to settle before continuing, like someone testing the weight of a word in his mouth. The mistake wouldn't be wanting what we're pretending not to want. The mistake would be, once again, letting fear decide for you. I'm not going to promise anything pretty, That's all I'll say. I didn't feel the ground vanish like some movie drama. I felt worse. I felt the ground simply remember that it had never been there at all. I'm not afraid. I lied. I know. That's why I said it. He didn't touch me. He didn't try. He turned his face back to the lake and stayed silent with an elegance that hurt more than if he'd insisted. The wind stirred the hem of the jacket against my knees. On some floor below, a door slammed, and the music from the ballroom pulsed for a second before sinking again. I'll give your jacket back. No. What do you mean, no? Give it back when it's warmer downstairs. I'll find you. I went down the interior staircase alone, with his jacket over my shoulders, feeling the weight like a silent accusation. I crossed the velvet hallway, and the same door that had framed my fear now served as a discreet exit. I pushed open the ballroom door. The jazz had changed songs, but the room looked the same. Waiters, glasses, smiles, the sweet smell of lily and expensive perfume mixed together. I looked for him in the corners and didn't see him. Later, at the entrance, a man in a dark coat I didn't know passed me without saying a word, returned my coat like someone running an errand for someone else, and let me go on with his jacket still on my shoulders. At the far end of the ballroom, beside the main entrance, Filippo stood with his hands in his pockets. He hadn't left. He waited, with that trained smile of someone who had already seen me cross a door before, and now saw me crossing another, and silently counted how many doors still stood between the two of us. He raised his glass in my direction, smiled wider, and I understood, with Tommaso's jacket weighing on my shoulders, and the entire ballroom carrying on without noticing a thing, that the night hadn't even begun. Chapter 2. Marin's Daughter. The doorbell rang 3 times in a row, before I remembered where I'd put my apartment keys, and when I opened the door, Margot was standing there with 2 cups of coffee, a bakery bag, and the expression of someone who hadn't slept at all. The smell of warm butter and cinnamon flooded the hallway before she even stepped in. Have you seen the internet? No? Good. Don't. But I'm going to tell you. She came in without waiting for an answer, crossed my Lincoln Park living room with the familiarity of someone who'd walked that route 1,000 times, dumped the bag on the kitchen table, and pushed one of the cups toward me. I was still in my pajamas, barefoot, my hair pulled up in a lazy bun, and the gray jacket was folded over the back of a chair because I didn't know what to do with it. The wool still held a scent that wasn't mine, something of dark wood, cedar maybe, with an undertone of civilized smoke. The Vance heiress on the armless arm of Tommaso Marchand, Margot recited, biting into a croissant. Photo from a ballroom photographer, him handing you the jacket on your way out, you not looking at the camera, his expression with that whole thing of a man who doesn't blink in a leap year. There's already a comment going viral among the on-duty columnists, a tasteless joke about paying to be the Vance heiress for 1 weekend. Margot, I know. I came with coffee before your mother calls. My mother hasn't seen the photo. Your mother saw the photo before everyone else. She probably also saw his angle and drew conclusions before the second sip of tea. I sat in the chair beside the folded jacket and drank the coffee like someone taking medicine. It was too strong, the way she knew I liked it on the days I needed a crutch. Margot pulled up another chair, sat across from me, rested her chin in both hands. The cold morning light came through the kitchen window and drew on her the outline of a satisfied witness. I'm going to send you a voice message. You're sitting right in front of me. Exactly because of that. A 3-minute voice message. You listen to it later, when you're ready to take a beating. She pulled out her phone, hit the button, and started talking into the microphone without looking away from me. Aubrey Vance, 27 years old. Symptoms: another man's jacket on the chair, coffee without asking for sugar, the look of someone replaying the tape. Initial diagnosis: the man said something you can't switch off. Treatment: listen to this message all the way through, and then call me so I can judge a lot. I smiled in spite of myself. It was a small smile, the kind that appears before we can stop it, and disappears slower than it should. He said the mistake would be letting fear decide for me once again. Margot went quiet for an entire second. By her standards, that was a speech. She set the croissant down on the napkin with unexpected gentleness. All right, she said, finally. I take back the judge a lot. The man is good. The man is dangerous in a way that's going to cost you, but he's good. The doorbell rang again. I looked at Margot. Margot looked at me. Neither of us was expecting anyone. I went to the door with the coffee in my hand and opened it without looking through the peephole, because the morning had already decided to be that kind of morning. The man on the other side was 40-something, short hair starting to gray at the temples, a black coat without flourish, hands crossed in front of his body. His shoes were impeccable, the kind of polish that only survives on someone who never runs or arrives late. He looked at me like someone checking off a list, then raised a tiny eyebrow. "Miss Vance, Yves Belliveau. Bonjour. I'll be accompanying you today." "Accompanying me where?" "Wherever you want to go." It was requested. By whom? You already know. His accent was French, but French from somewhere else, the kind that rolls the consonants like someone folding a handkerchief. Behind me, Margot appeared holding her coffee cup, and looked Eve up and down with the talent of an insurance investigator. "You're the driver," she said. "I am, and you talk. When necessary. Interesting. Aubrey, let him in. It's gotten cold." "I'd rather wait here, madame," Eve answered before I could decide, with the low voice of someone who never has to repeat a sentence. "You let me know when you're ready." Margot closed the door without hiding her urge to laugh, turned to me with the face of someone who had just received a gift wrapped in ribbon. "Aubrey, the man sends a driver, before noon. And the driver is polite. Do you realize how big this is? I realize how big the problem is. I realize how big the promise is. Go get changed. I'll wait with the Frenchman." I showered in 10 minutes, let the hot water run over my face until the redness of embarrassment faded, dressed in whatever was nearest. Black pants, cream silk blouse, low boots, hid the folded jacket in the back of the closet because I didn't know what else to do with it. And when I came back to the door, Eve was in the same spot. Hands crossed, with the expression of someone who had decided to turn patience into a profession. The gallery was empty at that hour on a Saturday. The smell of waxed wood and fresh paint welcomed me as always, and for an instant I had the illusion that the smell would protect me from the rest of the day. Margot turned on the lights. I pretended to check the inventory. Eve stayed outside beside a black car that drew no attention precisely because it was too obvious to draw any. Hadley, the receptionist, early 20s, engaged for 3 years, quoting her fiancé in any sentence where he fit, arrived half an hour later, saw the car and the driver, and looked at me like someone expecting an explanation. A visit. From the gallery? From my life. My fiancé was saying yesterday that life gets like this without warning. He said it exactly like that. "Hadley, I'm going." I slipped out the back when I figured I'd done enough performing of a productive morning. I crossed the corner to the cafe where Margot and I pretended to have lunch several times a week, pushed open the glass door, and the little bell made its usual sound. I sat by the window, ordered a tea I wasn't going to drink, watched the steam rise slowly against the fogged glass. Yves positioned himself at a table across the room, the kind that lets you see the door, without looking like you're watching it. He ordered water. He didn't take off his coat. The phone vibrated on the cold marble table. "Marraine," a message in 3 words. "Come here now." I looked at Yves across the cafe. Yves didn't look at me. That, somehow, was worse than if he'd asked. His trained indifference was a form of respect I wasn't used to receiving. "I need to go to my mother's house." "Très bien." Marin's house in the Gold Coast was white outside, white inside, and had the expensive silence of houses where no one has broken anything in decades. White lilies in the hall, chandeliers off at midday, heavy curtains filtering the light until it seemed to apologize for coming in. The housekeeper opened the door, led me to the living room, offered tea I declined. My mother was seated in her usual armchair, near the window, and looked at me the way she only looked at me when she'd already decided the whole script before I arrived. "Aubrey, mother, sit." "I'm fine standing." Marin breathed once through her nose. She did that when she thought I was being difficult, and ever since I'd learned to notice that breath, I'd decided to let myself be difficult more often. Her emerald ring gleamed against the pale arm of the chair when she straightened her posture. "You were seen yesterday with Tommaso." "The whole internet was seen with me yesterday with Tommaso, according to Margot. I asked him to keep an eye on you." "I know. He told me." I stayed silent. I sat on the edge of the sofa across from her chair, because sitting was a political gesture with people who expect you standing. The cushion barely sank under my weight, as if the room too had learned not to yield. "Why did you ask him, mother?" "Because Filippo is circling again. And he's dangerous. And you think I don't see it, but I do. You didn't say anything to me. I told Tommaso." "Why Tommaso, and not me?" Marin looked at the window. It was the first crack I'd seen in her in months. A short crack. She's good at closing it before it has time to become a fissure. But I saw it. Her chin trembled by a millimeter before returning to its marble place. Because I trust him. And me. You, I trust to grow. To survive. I trust him. Do you hear yourself saying that sentence? I do. Mother, you just turned me into a chess piece again. Aubrey, you called a friend of yours to take care of your daughter, without asking whether the daughter wanted it. And now you're going to tell me that's love. I didn't say it was love. I said it was trust. It's not the same thing when it comes to me, Mother. It never was. I stood up. I didn't slam the door. Slamming a door in my mother's house was admitting defeat. I just left, crossed the front garden where the hydrangeas were pruned with the precision of someone who has a gardener on Tuesdays. And when I reached the sidewalk, I noticed the black car was parked at the end of the block. Eve hadn't gotten out. Eve hadn't needed to. I walked to the car with the icy wind off the lake pushing me from the left side. He opened the back door without comment. I sat. I closed the door. The leather of the seat still held the warmth of the sun that had come through the window during the hour he'd waited. I looked out the window and had the first honest certainty of the day. Eve wasn't there because my mother asked. Eve was there because Tommaso decided, and Tommaso decided before my mother even asked, or regardless of it. The difference was subtle. The difference was everything. The phone vibrated in my lap. Private number. A short message. I didn't leave you for no reason. T. I read it 3 times. I looked at the back of Eve's head in the front seat, at the impeccable cut of his hair, at the absurd calm of his hands on the wheel. I looked again at the screen, at the dry initial of that signature that seemed to take up more space than it had a right to. I typed slowly. When? The answer came before the car turned the corner. It wasn't a word. It was an address. In the Loop. With a room number and nothing else. No time, no courtesy, no greeting. The dry confidence of someone who knew I would show up. Eve blinked at the rearview mirror, without granting me the courtesy of pretending he hadn't seen. Home, miss? He asked, with the calm of someone who already knew the answer. I looked out the window. The wind off the lake had started up again, lifting dry leaves on the sidewalk, and the white buildings of the Gold Coast fell away behind like a life I still didn't know how to let go of. No, I said. Not today, but tomorrow. Yes, and on Wednesday, in the Loop. Chapter 3. I'm afraid of liking you. The Uber stopped in front of an old building in the Loop. Dark stone facade, narrow windows, no sign. I confirmed the number 3 times before getting out. The address Tommaso had sent me the night before said nothing beyond a street, a number, and a time. That's how he wrote everything. No waste, no ornament. The doorman recognized me before I said my name. He just tilted his head and opened the interior elevator, the kind that exists in buildings that don't want anyone to know who lives there. I went up alone, facing my own reflection in the polished brass plate on the wall. I'd put on a dress my mother would have approved of, and boots she would have hated. It was the first conscious choice I'd made in the mirror in days. The door opened onto a dark wood hallway. It smelled of old paper, and something citrusy that must have cost a fortune. There were no windows to the street, only a wide pane of glass at the far end, and through it the Chicago winter afternoon came in gray, slanted, without warning. A tall, thin man, impeccable suit, crossed the hallway with a folder held against his chest. He looked at me with the precision of someone who had already read my name on at least 3 documents. Miss Vance? He said. Jonas Lavoie. Mr. Marchand's counsel. I figured. He's waiting for you at the end of the hall. Jonas adjusted his glasses, and he told me, specifically, not to try to be interesting in front of you. I smiled in spite of myself. Do you always obey? Almost never. Good day, miss. He disappeared through a side door, and the hallway returned to silence. I went on. The last door was open. The office was exactly what I expected from a man who spoke little. Dark wood, low shelves, 2 leather sofas that looked old on purpose, a work desk with no papers, no family frame, nothing but a pen and a glass of water. The window behind him looked out onto the lake in the distance, silver with winter. Tommaso was standing, his back to the window, white shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled to below the elbow. When I came in, he didn't come to me. He waited for me to reach him. You came alone, he said. You doubted I would come. No. A small silence. I doubted you'd come alone. I rested my bag on the arm of the sofa. I'm not the chess piece my mother thinks I am. I know. He pointed to the sofa, and I sat. Sit. He stayed standing for another second. Then he sat in the armchair across from me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of the fabric heated by his body seconds before. He folded his hands over his knee. And why did you run from Filippo? I looked at him with something between a laugh and exhaustion. No beating around the bush. You don't need beating around the bush. I breathed. The question was old. I knew many answers to it, And still I chose only one, because he thought he owned everything I was before I even knew what it was to be anything. Tommaso nodded, slowly. His eyes dropped, for one short second, to the sleeve of my dress, at the level of my left wrist. I knew what he was seeing, even without seeing. The thin scar, less than an inch long, slept there beneath the fabric. He didn't ask. I didn't explain. That silent exchange carried more than any long answer. The door opened without a knock. Eve came in with a tray, 2 cups of coffee, and the face of someone about to make a mistake. Patron. I asked for a double espresso. He stared at the cups. They gave me tea. Eve, I'll go back. Go back. The door closed. I looked at Tommaso, and his mouth was almost laughing. Almost. It was the closest thing to a smile I'd ever seen on that man. He doesn't make mistakes on purpose? I asked. He does. Tommaso unfolded his hands. Eve has a particular talent for faking incompetence when he thinks the conversation has gotten too heavy. And has it? He raised his eyes. It's getting there. The door opened again, and Eve came in with 2 new cups. He set both down on the low table with ceremony, picked up mine, read the label, handed it back to his boss, and gave me the other one. He left with the empty tray, muttering something in French I didn't need to understand. I laughed. It was small. It was embarrassing. It was the first thing in me that felt like mine since the night on the terrace. Tommaso watched me laugh, and for a second, his silence changed color. You laugh rarely, he said. I was raised to smile. It's not the same thing. It's not. He took a sip. I know the difference. There was a pause that wasn't empty. I looked at him, at the window behind him, at the cup I was holding. Somewhere between the leather of the sofa and the color of the coffee, I realized I had no desire at all to leave that place. Why did you bring me? I asked. You could have sent Jonas. You could have sent Eve. It didn't have to be you. It did. Why? He looked at me for a length of time that was too long to be polite. Because whoever makes you get into a car by his will loses the right to demand you trust him afterward. He tilted his chin slightly. I wanted you to come because you chose to come. I swallowed the sip of coffee I'd forgotten in my mouth. He stood up shortly after, put on his jacket with brief gestures, and reached for the door without saying where we were going. I grabbed my bag, grabbed my coat, grabbed that new courage I was learning to wear like a tight shoe. We crossed the dark wood hallway at the same pace. He greeted Jonas with a minimal nod and opened the side door for me. We went down in a smaller elevator, and the car was in the underground garage, engine already running. Eve opened the back door without saying, "Good afternoon." The car glided through the loop toward River North. I watched the city pass by the window, wet buildings, steam rising from manholes, heavy coats on the sidewalk. Tommaso didn't fill the silence. It was the first time in a long while that a man beside me wasn't trying to take up the air. The restaurant was closed to the public. A single door, no sign, 3 marble steps, a maitre d' who knew his name and mine, a table for 2 in the back, near a window that looked out onto an interior courtyard, 2 glasses of water, bread, olive oil, no staff in sight, although I knew there were people everywhere. Do you usually shut down entire restaurants? I asked. I don't usually take anyone to dinner. That knocked me down in a way I didn't expect. I looked at the napkin in my lap. I reorganized my expression. Your wife, I said, without thinking. He didn't look away. He just tilted his head slightly. You can ask. I don't know what to ask. Then don't ask. His voice dropped a tone. It was 7 years ago. She died from a bullet that was meant for me. I learned to sleep with the hallway light on, because the dark became a place where I remembered better. That's the simplest thing I can say about her without lying. I stayed silent for a while. I didn't have the right to touch that, and he gave me the key to the door anyway. I was introduced my whole life, I said quietly, at every event, as if I were part of the invitation. This is Aubrey, Marin's daughter. I grew up without really knowing where I ended and where my mother's name began. He nodded, and the gesture was that of someone who listened completely, not someone waiting his turn to speak. And now I'm learning, slowly, with small insolences, like taking an Uber to an address I don't know just because the man who sent me the address didn't say please. He almost laughed, almost. The food arrived on small plates, and I barely remember what I ate. I remember the temperature of the wine he declined. I remember the way he cut the bread. I remember the way the silence between one sentence and another seemed chosen with care. At some point between the second plate and the coffee, I heard myself say, without prior permission from my head, I'm not afraid of you. He waited. I'm afraid of liking you. The sentence came out before I could dress it in any elegance. It lay there between us, naked, beyond any retouching. I felt the blood rise to my ears and forced myself not to look away, because looking away now would be worse than having spoken. Tommaso stayed still. His eyes dropped from my eyes to my mouth, from my mouth to the sleeve of my dress, from the sleeve to the hand I had rested on the table without noticing. His silence deepened, and for one full second I thought I had pushed everything too far. He reached out his hand, slowly, without asking permission, but also without intruding. 2 fingers landed on my left wrist, exactly on the side where the scar slept, without pushing the sleeve aside, without touching the skin, just the fabric between us, and the precise pressure of someone who knew where he was. I forgot to breathe for a second. Aubrey, his voice was the lowest I'd heard. You just said the bravest thing you've said to me. It was the most idiotic. It was both. He withdrew his hand. The warmth of his fingers stayed on my skin longer than they stayed there. I looked at the glass of water, at my own wrist, at the courtyard window where a chandelier was lighting up. I'm not going to run, he said, but I'm also not going to chase you. I don't decide for you. Never again. Never again. Implies you already decided before. I did. He looked at all of me. On the night of the terrace, when you said your mother's sentence, I decided I'd stay close until you told me to leave. I couldn't answer right away. We left the restaurant when the streetlights had gone out, and the night had that blue quality of Chicago in January. Eve was beside the car, leaning against the back door, blowing on his hands. He looked up when he saw us, and looked up a second later, when he saw something else. Tommaso followed his gaze. Across the street, leaning against a lamppost, with a cigarette burning slowly between his fingers, was Filippo. The same handsome smile as always, the coat open, the posture of someone who wanted to be seen. He raised the cigarette like a greeting. Tommaso didn't raise his voice. He didn't quicken his step. He just shifted his hand to my waist without touching, opened the car door, waited for me to get in, and closed it. He walked around to the other side without looking even once at the man across the street. It was more devastating than if he had crossed it. Inside, he sat beside me. Eve got into the front seat without comment. The car pulled away from the curb slowly. He's following me, I said. He is. For how long? Since the night at the hotel. I looked at my hand, still in my lap, and noticed it was trembling just enough for me to notice. Tommaso placed his open hand on the seat between us, palm up. He didn't ask. He didn't demand. He just left it there. I placed mine over it after about 15 seconds. His fingers closed, slowly, exactly one at a time. The phone vibrated in my bag. It took me 2 rings to decide to open it. It was from my mother. 4 words. No signature. He called me. He knows about the money. I gripped the phone with my free hand. The other stayed in Tommaso's, and for some reason I didn't let go. What is it? He asked, without turning his face. I brought the phone to his angle. He read it without moving. His jaw tightened 0.5 millimeter. That was the equivalent, in that man, of a scream. What money? I asked. He didn't answer right away. He looked ahead, at the traffic light slowly changing to green, at the city that went on as if nothing of what was coming was going to happen. Your mother explains. It's not mine to tell. The refusal entered me like a key into a lock I didn't know I had. Chapter 4: What My Mother Owes. The gallery opened as always. Hadley was at the reception, talking too loudly with a client about her fiancé, and the smell of coffee from the new machine already filled the lobby before 9. The gray January light slid down the windows and hit the white walls with that clean coldness I used to love. Margot appeared at my shoulder before I'd even put my bag on the chair. You have the face of someone who slept 3 hours and cried for 2. Good morning to you too. Good morning, liar. She stopped in front of me, arms crossed, the wool scarf falling crooked on one side. What happened? I looked at the room. The winter light came through the window and drew a bright rectangle on the cement floor. The canvases from the January exhibition had been on the wall too long, with that blue of Margot Fournier's that in the morning looked like sea, and in the afternoon looked like a bruise. I felt the weight of the bag on my shoulder as if it were a hand that wouldn't let go. My mother sent me a message. About a debt. What debt? I still don't know. I planted both hands on the edge of the work table, feeling the cold wood against my palms. I'm going to try to talk to her after lunch. Margot didn't joke. It was the first time in months that she didn't joke. And it was that absence of a joke that tightened my throat in a way no joke could have. Do you want company? I want your silence. I can do that. She reached out and held my wrist for 2 seconds, on the right side, without even knowing. I know how to be quiet company. She left for the back room. I stood looking at the phone, waiting, the kind of waiting that seems to have a physical weight. No new message from Marin, none from Tommaso. The silence of the two was of opposite natures, and left me standing in the middle without knowing which to lean on. My mother's always tasted of something postponed. His tasted of something whose time to be said hadn't come yet. The phone rang at 11 in the morning. It was neither of the two. "Miss Vance," the voice was Jonas Lavoie's. "I need you to come to the entrance of the gallery's parking lot. Discreetly, without a coat if possible, so it looks like you're only stepping out for a minute." "What happened?" "Mrs. Vance hasn't been home for 3 hours. The housekeeper found the back door open." "Eves is on his way to you." I dropped the phone on the counter, grabbed my coat anyway because his appearances rule seemed absurd given what I was feeling, and went down. The service hallway smelled of cheap cleaning product, and the floor creaked under my heels. The parking lot was an interior courtyard with 5 spaces and 2 doors. Eva's car came in through the side gate with the engine low, wet tires leaving 2 dark streaks on the concrete. The back door opened before he stopped. "Get in," he said. "Where are we going?" "Bucktown, the patron's house." He looked at me in the rearview mirror. "You breathe first, then you think. Eve, miss, tell me something true." He thought for 2 seconds, his fingers tapping lightly on the wheel. "He's not going to let happen to your mother what happened to his." I swallowed that. I looked out the window. Chicago passed by gray, with that midday light that looks late in January, and the glass fogged at the corners because of the heat of the car against the cold outside. I thought of my mother in her bed in the Gold Coast, or anywhere that wasn't her bed in the Gold Coast, and I lost my breath for 1 short second, the kind the body gives back on its own without us having to ask. The house in Bucktown was the last thing I expected. From the outside, it was a discreet townhouse, gray brick facade, small porch, flowerless pots. Inside, it was warm, pale wood, books with no apparent order on the low shelves, a low sofa with a wool throw folded over the arm, an open kitchen with mismatched cups on every shelf. It smelled of coffee made early in the morning, and of an old wood that wouldn't come out even with wax. It didn't look like a safe house. It looked like the house of a man who had chosen not to live there. Tommaso was waiting for me in the middle of the room. He had no jacket, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, the same as always, and still he seemed smaller than I remembered, as if he'd spent the night awake. There was a gray shadow under his eyes that he didn't bother to hide. "Sit," he said. "I can't." "Then don't sit." I collapsed. Not on the sofa. On the floor, beside the sofa, with my back against the rough upholstery and my knees against my chest. The tears came in a way I'd never learned to control, because I'd never had to. I cried for my mother, and I cried for all the time she'd tried to be a better woman than she'd been capable of being, and I cried for the girl I had been in front of her, never managing to understand why the mother I had was the mother I had. Tommaso sat on the floor beside me. Not on the sofa, on the floor, with his back against the same wall as the sofa. His legs were so long he had to bend his knees a great deal. He stayed there, beside me, without touching, his shoulder about an inch from mine. I felt his warmth without the touch, and it was worse, and it was better. He didn't take my hand. He didn't say everything's going to be okay. He didn't say anything. That was a silence different from all the male silences I had known. My father's silence was a warning. Filippo's silence was a punishment. The silence of my mother's men in dining rooms was a performance. The silence of that man beside me was an empty room I could walk in and out of by my own will. When I managed to breathe fully again, it was he who spoke first, and it was little. "I'm not going to fix this," he said. "I'm going to be here. It's the same thing." "It's not, but today it'll feel like it." I laughed through my nose, in spite of myself, and the laugh came out hoarse from the crying that hadn't finished coming down. His phone rang. He took it from his pocket, looked at the screen, and the air in the room changed. The temperature didn't change, but something changed, the same way a street changes when the wrong car turns onto it. "Filippo," he said. "I want you not to speak," he answered. He put it on speaker and rested the phone on the floor between the two of us, carefully, like someone setting down something that might bite. "Marchand." Filippo's voice was too calm, with that drawn-out tone of someone who'd already had the first drink of the day. "Your girl's there." "She is. I want her here in 24 hours. Face, dress, ring. The address arrives on her phone with an hour to spare. If she doesn't come, your friend Marin disappears for good." Compliments on your recent taste in Canadian wines." He hung up. I looked at the phone on the floor. I looked at Tommaso. His eyes were fixed on a point 10 feet ahead, on the corner of the bookshelf, and I saw for the first time how much red that man I'd thought was made of steel was capable of. I also saw his jaw lock and unlock just once, slowly, like someone swallowing something sharp. "No," I said. He turned to me, slowly. "No what? No, I'm not going to stay hidden. I'm not going to let my mother die because I was raised to wait for the room to dry." I swallowed. "I'm going, but I'm going my way. Aubrey, listen to me before you say no." I straightened my back against the sofa. "I'll go with a wire, not on my body. He's going to search me before he breathes. I know him. It goes in the heel of the boot, sewn into the lining." Eve creates a distraction at the entrance. One of his men sets off a false alarm outside, and while he's worrying about that, I'm already inside the halo of light. I'll make him brag. He'll brag. Tommaso. He can't not brag. He'll tell me everything he did to my mother, to my family's name, to the scheme of debts. And when he tells, it becomes evidence. And then you come in with your men, and he becomes the government's problem, not my body's. He didn't answer right away. He looked at me for a length of time that hurt because it was so long, and I saw his shoulders rise and fall once in the rhythm of someone measuring the size of his own no before deciding not to say it. "You know what you're asking. I know. You know what I'm about to agree to. I know." He closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, it was the first time I saw him choose between what he wanted and what he believed was right, and it was the second most intimate thing he had ever shown me in his life. "Taking this choice from you would be doing what your mother did her whole life," he said, quietly. "I won't." I breathed. The air came in cold and went out warm, and it was the first full breath of the day. "But you're not going alone. And you're not going without me having read, word by word, what he's going to say. And if at any second the wire fails, I come in, and the plan becomes whatever it needs to become. Is that agreed?" "It's agreed." Jonas arrived half an hour later. He had the folder against his chest as always, and 2 phones in his hand. Tommaso requested a video call. Sloane Ferraro appeared on the screen in a room lit by cold light, hair pulled back, blazer shoulders cut to measure. I had never seen the prosecutor who owed favors to his family, and within 3 minutes I already knew why he trusted her. She didn't call me dear. She didn't apologize for the scene. She asked 3 practical things, wrote down the 3 answers with a pen that scratched the paper, and said only 1 sentence before hanging up. Miss Vance, if you record this right, I'll have him locked up before dawn." "Right how?" "By not interrupting the man when he's feeling important." I smiled without much will. I'm good at letting a man feel important, I figured. She hung up. Jonas left. Eve came in to leave a coat on the sofa and left too, without a sound, in the manner of someone who learned early not to step on what wasn't his. The house was left to me and Tommaso. An afternoon turned to night in the window without my noticing, with that winter quickness in which the light vanishes between one blink and the next. When there were 3 hours left to midnight, he stood up and went to the kitchen. I heard the faucet run, the glass touch the stone counter, the low sound of a drawer opening. He came back with a glass of water, which he placed in my hand, and with a small box, which he opened on the low table of the living room. Inside, on the dark velvet, was a thin chain of matte silver. The pendant was a tiny cedar branch, the size of a fingernail, engraved with a precision that seemed wrong for a mafia symbol. It was too discreet for that. "It's not jewelry," he said, before I could ask. "It's a reminder, for you, that you're not alone even when it seems that way." He reached out his hand. "May I?" I tilted my head. He came to the sofa, knelt on one knee in front of me, and placed the chain around my neck with a calm that made me ashamed of feeling what I was feeling. The silver fell cold against my collarbone and warmed the next second. His fingers stayed a second longer than they needed to on the back of my neck, rough at the spot where the hair ends. He pulled back. I didn't say thank you because he would have hated it. "Aubrey, yes. If at any point you want to give up, you give up. You open the door, you leave, you go home, and I'll handle whatever needs handling. You don't have to prove anything." "I know." "Say it again." "I know." He looked at all of me. That was enough for me. The clock on the living room wall struck midnight, and Sunday began without anyone announcing it. There was still the whole day ahead. Filippo had given 24 hours, and they would only end the following night. I heard the 12 chimes, one by one, low and identical, And somewhere between the 4th and the 5th, I understood that I was afraid. Somewhere between the 8th and the 9th, I understood that I was really going to do it. When the last sound died in the wood of the room, I took a breath like someone deciding to swallow her own fear, carefully, so it would go all the way down whole. Chapter 5. The Confession. Sunday's early hours had a different silence, the kind that welcomes no one. I was in the back seat of the armored car, with the wire fixed under the turtleneck blouse. Tommaso had changed the spot at the last minute, on the chest, not the boot. The boot he'll search, feeling the microphone like a second heart glued between my ribs. Eve drove with no music, no radio, nothing but his held breath and mine. Tommaso, beside me, kept his hands resting on his knees, and it was strange to see his hands still like that, as if the effort were greater than moving them. The window beside me was open a finger's width, and the Chicago air came in with that smell of wet steel the city has before dawn, mixed with the expensive fabric of the seat and the discreet cologne he wore. Something of burnt cedar, like the pendant that now hung inside my blouse, cold against the skin warmed by fear. "The signal will reach inside the warehouse," he said, and the voice came lower than I expected. "Sloan will be with the team 200 meters away. You talk," he answers, "and we come in. That's it. That's it," I repeated, and didn't even recognize my own voice. He looked at me sideways for a second. His eyes, under the yellow light of the street lamps spilling across the windshield, seemed darker, and I realized his calm wasn't the absence of fear. It was fear mastered by decades of practice. That, instead of frightening me, steadied me. Before crossing the Chicago River in the South Loop, Eve stopped in a poorly lit parking lot, and Tommaso got out without hurry, opened the passenger door of a dark SUV that was waiting for us, and held out his hand to me. I understood without asking. In that world, the car that arrived could never be the car that had been seen before. "My father's rule," said Eve, adjusting his jacket as he settled behind the new wheel. "Tommaso learned it from him. I learned it from Tommaso. You'll learn it from me, mademoiselle." I felt the corner of my mouth tremble in the outline of a laugh that didn't quite come out. It was what was left of me in that moment, and Tommaso noticed, because he noticed everything. He touched his fingers to my knee for a second, without squeezing, and pulled away right after. I knew what that meant. I'm here. I won't be where you can see me. The SUV smelled of new leather and black coffee forgotten in the cup holder. Eve turned the key, and the engine woke with a low, muffled growl, almost a large animal breathing inside a cage. We crossed the bridge without passing more than 3 cars. The south side in the early hours looked like a city inside the city, with dead lamps, distant dogs, containers stacked like crooked teeth against the sky. The warehouse was on a nameless street, the kind the map forgets on purpose. Windows covered with sheet metal, the smell of old oil mixed with the rivers. I got out alone. My heels on the cracked concrete sounded like gunshots anticipating other gunshots, and I thought, without wanting to, of my mother tied up inside, and I thought of the woman she had tried to be when I was small, before the ballrooms and the debts. It was that woman I brought into the warehouse, not the heiress. The side door was ajar. I pushed it with the tips of my fingers, and the iron squealed low, a sound that seemed to stretch on for hours. Inside, the air was denser, with the smell of cement dust, old grease, and something vaguely sweet I didn't want to identify. The metal beams of the ceiling crossed high overhead, and there was a single lit bulb up there, swaying gently on a chain, casting shadows that moved as if they too were afraid. Filippo was waiting for me in the center of that halo of yellow light, leaning against an iron column like someone posing for a photo. I saw my mother in a corner, sitting in an office chair with one wrist tied to the arm of it. She had a thin cut at the corner of her mouth, and her chin lifted, the same chin as always. For an instant I wanted to hug her, and for another I wanted to cry with pride. "Aubrey," said Filippo, opening his arms as if I were a bride arriving at the altar. "You came. I said she'd come, Mommy. I said so. Don't call her that," I said, before thinking. "A still bites," he laughed, low, and the laugh hit the sheet metal of the windows and came back small, dirty. "I always liked that about you. The rest was decoration. Tell the old man of the Canadian wine I send my regards. Come here." I didn't go. I stopped 3 steps from him, dropped my bag at my side, and crossed my arms in a way that looked like defiance, and was just a way to keep the microphone close to my chest. The concrete under my heels seemed more solid than I was, and it was on it that I propped up what was left of my courage. "What do you want, Filippo?" Say it out loud. I want to hear it. What's mine? He answered, and the smile let go a little of the front of his face. Your mother's name. The debt she took on with my family 9 years ago and that no one ever paid. You think that old Frenchman pays this bill with any signature? He doesn't. The one who pays is you. What debt? He laughed again, and this time louder, because he had an internal audience of his men leaning against the warehouse walls, and because he always needed an audience. I counted 4 silhouettes, 2 on the left, leaning against a dead forklift, 1 near the back door, another above, on a rusted catwalk, the gun resting carelessly on his shoulder. The debt that bought the silence of your dead father, he said. The debt Marin pretended she didn't owe. I know every cent. I know who handed over the envelope. I know which night. I know the name of the bank that made the first installment disappear. You want to hear it all, Aubrey? I can recite it. Recite it, I said. And it was the coldest thing that had ever come out of me. He recited it. Dates, names, amounts. The old scheme that had allowed the Rourkes to get so close to our family. The harassment he'd ordered over the past few months. The messages. The man he paid to stand on the gallery corner pretending to smoke. Each sentence entered the microphone like a nail going into wood. I didn't interrupt. I looked at my mother only once, and she had her eyes closed, as if hearing it hurt more than being tied up. I felt the sweat run between my shoulder blades, cold, tracing the wire. Every time he said a name, I thought of a face. Every time he said an amount, I thought of a dress my mother had forced me to wear to receive precisely those people. And now, said Filippo, taking a step toward me, you come with me, and I let the old woman go. It's simple. It's not simple, I said. You killed the part of me that knew how to be simple. The back door of the warehouse opened without a sound. I didn't turn. I saw it in Filippo's eyes. He understood before he saw. His men tried to draw their guns and realized, all at the same time, that someone was already aiming at each of them. Tommaso stepped into the halo of light, with the calm of someone arriving late out of courtesy, not carelessness. The jacket was buttoned, the tie in place, his step in the same rhythm as always, as if that warehouse were a ballroom, and the iron column a sculpture he'd commissioned. Filippo, he said, and that was all. Marchand. Filippo turned to my mother as if seeking a shield. His hands reached for her shoulder. I'll kill her, I swear to God. Tabarnak, Eve muttered, low, behind me. I didn't hear the gun leave the holster. I just saw the short, lateral gesture, before he took 2 steps and was beside Filippo. The pistol Filippo tried to raise ended up on the floor before he understood his own arm. Eve said nothing more. He just pulled Filippo away from my mother's chair and shoved him to his knees on the concrete. The sound of his knees hitting the slab was dry, definitive, and I felt a small, ugly satisfaction I didn't feel ashamed of. I knelt in front of my mother. Her perfume was still there, under the smell of fear, that old Chanel she bought in Paris and rationed all year long. I untied her wrist with trembling fingers. Her skin beneath the rope was marked red, and I ran my thumb lightly over it without quite knowing what I was promising. She opened her eyes and didn't speak to me, because some silences are the beginning of a conversation that will last months. Sloane Ferraro came in right behind the federal agents, exactly as she'd promised over the video call at the safe house. Dark coat, ID on her chest, a folder in her hand, and the recording already transferred in real time to her device. She let the agents handcuff Filippo before approaching. It was the first time I'd seen a prosecutor work up close, and I understood, in that moment, why she owed the Marchands favors, and why she could, even so, keep her chin lifted as if she owed nothing. Mr. Rourke, she said, opening the folder before the agents who held him. The charges are kidnapping, extortion, assault, and criminal conspiracy. For now. Filippo laughed one last time, but the laugh had lost its edge. When they lifted him, he looked at me and not at Tommaso, and it was the only decent thing he did in his adult life. He acknowledged that he had lost to me. My mother cried. For the first time in my adult life, I saw my mother cry for real. It wasn't the elegant cry of a funeral. It wasn't the useful cry she used at dinners when she needed something. It was an ugly cry, with a red nose, and her chest rising out of sync with her chin. I hugged my mother, and discovered she was smaller than I remembered. Her shoulders fit inside my arms, and there was something terrifying in discovering, at 27, that the woman who had ruled over me my entire life was just a woman. We went back in the same SUV. Tommaso sat in the middle seat with me and my mother, saying nothing. His weight beside me shifted the cushion a little, and the warmth of his shoulder passed through the 2 layers of fabric to my skin. He held out his open hand on the seat, between us, palm turned up, and left it there. I looked at that hand for an entire minute. The lines of the palm were deep, the fingers long, the old wedding ring absent since the first time I'd seen him. I thought of all the men in my life who had reached out their hand to me as if mine were already theirs before I placed it. That hand didn't demand. That hand waited. I placed mine over his. Tommaso closed his fingers slowly, like someone closing a door without locking it. Eve drove, looking strictly at the road. I knew he was hearing everything. I knew he would pretend he'd heard nothing. That was the kind of man Tommaso chose around him. And maybe that said more about Tommaso than any sentence on a hotel terrace. My mother rested her head against the glass. The city lights passed over her face in bands, and I saw features I had never seen before, because I had never really looked. Her chin trembled by a millimeter with each breath, and the smeared makeup at the corner of her eye was the most naked thing I had ever seen on that face. It was at that moment that she spoke, in a thread of a voice, without turning to me. "Owen, I need to tell you something before dawn." And what became clear, in the way she said it, was that there was still a layer beneath all the layers, and that layer was the truth I had spent my whole life without permission to hear. Chapter 6. Without asking permission. The private hospital room in Streeterville smelled of expensive disinfectant and flowers no one had asked for. There was an arrangement of white lilies on the dark wood dresser, the kind of deliveries that arrive with anonymous cards in families like mine, and the sickly sweetness of the petals mixed with the alcohol and the starched linen of the sheets in an almost indecent way. My mother was sitting up in the bed, in a pale blue gown that diminished her shoulders, and I sat in the armchair beside her, my coat still buttoned. It was early Monday afternoon. Outside the glass, the city pretended to function normally, with its yellow cabs racing down the avenue, and Lake Michigan gleaming in a winter blue that hurt the eyes. "I don't want you to forgive me now," said my mother, and her voice had a new exhaustion that didn't fit any of her masks. "I have no right to that. Mother, let me speak, Aubrey. For the first time in my life, let me finish the sentence." I closed my mouth. I rested my hands on my knees. I waited. Her hands trembled in a discreet way, and I noticed she had taken off her rings for the first time in 20 years, and that the pale mark on her ring finger looked like a small scar of things she had decided not to fake anymore. She spoke of the old debt, of the envelope, of the silence she had bought, so that my dead father's name wouldn't be dragged through the mud. She spoke of how, over the years, she had confused protection with control, and how a confusion like that, inside a mother, becomes a very refined form of violence. She spoke of Filippo. She spoke of when she offered me to that family as if I were the coin, missing from the envelope, never calling it that, not even in thought. Her voice broke at strange points, in the middle of simple words, as if the small words weighed more than the big ones. "I used you," she said. "I know that now. I knew it inside for years, and pretended I didn't. You don't have to tell me it's all right. It isn't. It won't be for a long time. But I needed you to hear me once without makeup in my voice. I cried, not in a pretty way. I cried for what she had been, and for what she had never been. I cried for the girl I was in the Gold Coast house, learning to sit with my chin lifted, and to shut my mouth before the question. I cried for my mother, who was the person who had hurt me most, and who, even so, was the only person who could have spared me, and didn't. The tears ran hot down my face, and I wiped none of them away, because wiping them would have been too old a gesture, the kind my mother taught me in front of the hall mirror when I was 8 years old. She didn't try to hug me. It was the bravest thing she did that afternoon. When I left the room, the hallway was empty. The cold lamps buzzed softly above the gleaming linoleum, and the sound of my heels seemed delayed relative to my steps, as if the whole building were breathing slowly. I walked to the end, where an enormous window looked out onto the city. I pressed my forehead to the glass and stayed there, feeling the cold of the glass run down my spine. I thought of Tommaso for the first time since the warehouse. I thought of him the way you think of someone who hasn't yet been chosen out loud. And then I chose. Eve was waiting for me at the hospital entrance, leaning against the black SUV with the most discreet face he could manage, which still wasn't very discreet. The Chicago wind blew in gusts, and he had his coat collar up, and his hands shoved in his pockets like a man who had learned to wait for women with bad news. "Mademoiselle," he said, opening the door. "Home. To his place." He nodded like someone who had bet on that answer and won. On the way, he told me he was considering asking the boss for a raise, because the work lately involved a lot more heart than the salary chart accounted for. I laughed for the first time in 3 days. It was a hoarse sound, and it was mine. Through the car window, the city passed in blurs of yellow light and stone facades, and I noticed that for the first time in months I wasn't looking back to check whether anyone was following me. The doorman recognized me without Eve needing to speak, and released the private elevator with a nod. I went up alone, counting the floors by the low sound of the motor, and the door opened directly onto the entrance of the penthouse. Tommaso's penthouse in the Gold Coast was a pale gray place, with books on the walls and the view of Lake Michigan on the wall opposite the door. There was a discreet smell of cedar and old paper, the kind that rises from the shelves when no one has opened the windows in hours. A tall floor lamp was lit near the leather armchair, and its light drew a golden circle on the dark rug. I had been there only in thought. When I came in, he was standing by the window. No jacket, sleeves rolled to the elbow. He turned slowly and didn't say my name. He waited. "I came for myself," I said. "Not for you. Not because you saved me. I came because for the first time in my life, no one chose for me, and the first choice I made on my own is this one." Tommaso received the sentence like someone receiving a weight he has the strength to carry. He crossed the room slowly, stopped a step away from me, and stayed there, at the distance I had drawn without knowing. I could feel the warmth of his body through the coat I still hadn't taken off, and I could feel his scent, too. Dry bergamot, a bit of whiskey he hadn't drunk, the shaving soap I'd already memorized without meaning to. "I'm not going to ask you to marry me," he said, and it was the most romantic sentence I had ever heard in my life. "Not now. You just won your freedom. I'm not going to ask you to trade one big word for another big word the next day. What are you going to offer then?" He thought. He didn't pretend to think. He thought for real, his eyes fixed on mine, as if the answer mattered more than looking good. There was a silence between us that wasn't empty. It was full of the things he was choosing to leave out. Time, truth, a life in which you'll never again need to be chosen by anyone but yourself. I can't promise absolute safety. I can promise the door will never be locked from the inside. I took a deep breath. I didn't cry. It was a different exhaustion, cleaner, as if someone had opened a window inside my chest and let the February air come in and carry away the old smoke. I took the step that was missing. Tommaso lifted his hand and touched his fingers to my face for the first time, without the pretext of protecting me from someone. It was a light touch, lingering, the kind that asks permission even when it's already granted. I leaned my face against his palm and closed my eyes. His skin had the steady warmth of someone who was never in a hurry. When he kissed me, it was just one kiss, calm, unhurried, with his forehead leaning against mine right after. We stayed like that for a length of time I can't measure, his breath dropping until it matched the same rhythm as mine. He held out his hand. I took his hand. He turned off the floor lamp with his other arm, without letting go of my hand, and guided me down the hallway. The carpet absorbed the sound of our steps, and the only light left was that of the lake, coming in blue through the gaps in the curtains. The bedroom door closed behind us with a dry, civilized click, the kind that suits men who know how to close things without violence. The next morning arrived gently. The light came through the window in soft bands, passing through the pale linen of the curtains, and I woke before him. I lay on my side, watching. He had a crease at the corner of his eye that I still didn't know, the kind that appears when the face truly rests. His breath came in and went out without the control he imposed when he was awake. I got up without a sound, put on a shirt of his that was draped over the armchair, rolled the sleeves twice so they wouldn't cover my hands, and went to the kitchen. The kitchen was wide and silent, with a gray stone counter and cabinets in brushed wood. I made coffee. The smell rose thick, warm, and filled the room in seconds. I set 2 cups on the counter. I poured his first. I didn't think about why. It was a small gesture, the size of a morning, and even so, it seemed like the biggest gesture I had ever made of my own free will in my adult life. Tommaso appeared barefoot in the kitchen doorway, in pajama pants and an open shirt. His hair was slightly tousled on the side he'd slept on, and the detail crossed through me with a tenderness I hadn't expected to feel before coffee. He didn't say good morning. He crossed the cold floor, stopped behind me, and rested his hand on the back of my neck for just a second. His palm was broad and warm, and his fingers landed with that calm firmness that was his physical signature. It was a gesture he had never made before, and I understood why he had waited until that morning to make it. "Thank you," he said, and I didn't know if it was for the coffee, for the night, for the hand held out on the SUV seat, or for all of it at once. I rested my head against his shoulder. The linen of his shirt smelled of clean soap and sleep, and beneath the fabric I felt the warmth of his skin settle against my cheek. The view of Lake Michigan, out there, was the same as always, but inside me something had learned to look. The gulls streaked the sky in white strokes, and a distant cargo ship glided slowly along the horizon line, as if the world out there had decided to move at our pace. And it was at exactly that instant, between one sip of coffee and the next, that I felt something small inside me ask whether women like me, daughters of mothers like mine, ex-fiancés of men like Filippo, could really live inside peace for very long. It was a tiny question, almost polite, the kind asked at the door before coming in, hat in hand and voice low. I smiled. I pushed the thought away without fighting it. I rested my head more against Tommaso's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart against my temple. I decided that, for now, that morning was enough, and that some questions could wait outside, quietly, until I had the courage to open the door. Lena here, that wraps up book 1, and I've already finished book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee. I thought I was finally safe. That Tommaso Marchand's love was real. That after so much blood and so many scars, we had built something no one could destroy. Then the video arrived. Tommaso going in through the back of a discreet clinic in Chicago. Beside him, a woman I had never seen, elegant, intimate, touching his arm like someone who had the right. Then, $1 million transfers to that same account of hers, deleted messages, and worst of all, my own mother's name appearing in his contact history, as if it had never left. My stomach turned. The chill rose up the back of my neck as I reviewed the images, one after another. All that time him protecting me, touching me as if I were the only one. And now this? I trusted him with my life, with my wounds, with the future he swore we were going to have. And what if all of it was nothing but a lie from the start? And what if the man who says he loves the daughter was also the man who destroyed the mother? Because her contact was right there, and that ring he carries in his pocket that was never for me, it was for another. The truth is coming, but I don't know if I'll survive it. Like I said, that was just a taste of book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Unfortunately, many people have been downloading our audio, effectively copying the entire story, and simply reposting it on YouTube. If you want to watch the original story and be the first to receive the next ones, search for My Stories by Lena on YouTube to get the best dark romance content. Remember, the official channel is My Stories by Lena on YouTube. I'll be waiting for you there. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from mafia romance and billionaire romance to our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a book 2, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please feel free to interact. From this moment on, this is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to mystoriesromance.com and press play. Welcome to the family.